Hi, I'm Colin Seal, founder and CEO of ThinkLaw. Today we're looking at lessons 13 and 14 together. This is a two-part series, but I figured it might be useful to just go through it together because really these are broken up into two parts just because it takes a little while to go through it. But it's actually quite kind of straightforward, especially since we've already done a discovery lesson. So in this case, we start out by talking about a golf club case just to introduce the concept of negligence, which is a little bit different than battery, but worth discussing. And then we're going to do the same process of going through a factually incomplete case, identifying the witnesses, physical evidence, questions, and getting additional facts, and then telling the story based off of that, and actually giving some substantive analysis of whether or not this person should be liable or not liable for what happened here. So this starts out by looking at this issue of a father that basically left a golf club out, and then his son hits another girl in the face, in the jaw with this golf club, and gets her seriously injured, and whether or not the father should then be liable for the golf club. Again, we have some really great probing questions here to kind of help push students along in their thinking. The best practice is to give students about 5 minutes or so to actually reflect on their own as they're analyzing this using that table 13A. And then afterwards actually having that discussion where we're asking these questions of, was it wrong to leave this club outside? Would it be different if you left a hammer outside or a knife or a gun? Is there something about those items that are a little bit different in a golf club? And even a concept of whether it's fair to sue the father for something that the son did is an interesting thing to discuss as well. So we take this whole idea, we learn about negligence. And negligence is basically if you have a duty and you breach that duty and you cause damages related to that breach, you'll be on the hook for negligence. What does that mean? Usually you have a duty to just be reasonably safe about things, right? Like, it's a little bit clearer in this case that you probably shouldn't leave, you know, swords hanging out in the area where kids are known to play because they might hurt one another. But maybe a golf club isn't one of those inherently dangerous objects that would cause that sort of damage. So important to get that frame of mind, right? No need to go really deep into negligence. It's basically when you do something that's, very careless and probably you should have known better to do it and you had a duty to do better. And we're looking at this case about a really unfortunate accident. Um, really unfortunate. So if you know within your group that anybody has been through any incident anywhere close to this, you probably don't want to even have this lesson because it could be a little bit traumatic. But what we're talking about here is a guy that goes into a car and goes for a brief visit to his friend, and when he pulls out of his car, he didn't know, but there was a baby that was behind his right rear tire. And he ran over the baby, and he thought it was just a bump or something, and ended up killing the baby. So this is a case of, look before you drive is what it's called, and it turns on whether or not he had a duty to look underneath his back wheel before he drive. So again, critical thinking is not supposed to be emotional, but we actually start this by talking about the emotions of it because you do a lot better job of analyzing something when you recognize the shock value and some of the emotional factors that happen after you hear about what happened, because now you can start focusing on the facts once you kind of acknowledge the emotional part of that situation. So this case, we're actually trying to incorporate another learning modality. We're getting students to actually draw what happened. So we want them to actually put together a diagram of the key things that happen in this little piece of evidence that we know so far. Like we need to have some idea of how the car was situated, how the friend's house was situated, and some sort of a diagram. We explain a little bit about how that map should look, but a lot of students tend to get very creative about how this thing works. And it's helpful because we'll revisit that diagram later in the lesson. And then we go through the process of witness, physical evidence, and question. And by the time you get there, usually you have about 50 to 55 minutes that have passed already once you actually fill out all the different elements in this table. So with that said, that leads us right into our next lesson. And I'll just go straight into that. What we start out this lesson doing is explaining some of the new facts that we now know. And a lot of this will be in your PowerPoint. And what we're actually doing in this lesson is actually having students analyze how and whether or not these facts are relevant. Okay? How is this information helpful? Whose case might it help as we kind of go through what happened here? Right? Very interesting information that comes out. Some of it might be very shocking. Students might really change their opinion about the case as they hear these new facts. But from hearing this, they need to come up with new questions and now come up with a second set of responses. We give them new facts. Again, they're analyzing these new facts. This is something we didn't do in the initial discovery round, but now it just gives us a little bit more to look at. Okay? Now we're going to draw a new diagram. Now that we know all this information, we're going to draw the new diagram and then tell the full story about what we think happened here. And then when we think bigger, the whole thing when we think bigger here is, did he owe a duty to check underneath his car to see if any children were hiding underneath, based off of all that we know? And students should be using the Draw plus C framework at that point when they're putting together their analysis. So it's a great lesson with a lot of interesting activities to get students involved in it. Very unfortunate real life event that did happen, but interesting still to just have them go through this discovery process and pay attention to a lot of these details that come out. That wraps up lessons 13 and 14, and now we're going to move on to lesson 15.